The last push for pro-government forces. They know the goal is within sight. The rebels struggling to hold on to the few districts that remain under their control. As the president's forces and allies sweep through retaking East Aleppo, thousands have been fleeing, Russia claiming they've aided 100,000 escape opposition-held areas. Today, fresh allegations of war crimes against the regime. 82 civilians killed, women and children among them, in their home, according to the UN.
Civilians have paid a brutal price during this conflict, and we're filled with the deepest foreboding for those who remain in this last hellish corner of opposition-held eastern Aleppo. While some reportedly managed to flee yesterday, some were reportedly caught and killed on the spot, and others were arrested.
With the fighting going on around them, those still trapped sending what they say are their final messages, a plea for an end to their nightmare.
Don't believe anymore in the United Nations. Don't believe anymore in the international community. Don't think that they are not satisfied with what's going on. They are satisfied that we are being killed.
Social media has been awash with similar messages from East Aleppo. 7-year-old Bana Al-Abed, who's tweeted along with her mother throughout the war in Aleppo, posted, "My dad is injured now. I am crying." Her father's text to the BBC, "Guess it's goodbye. Thanks all who stand for us and pray for us." The White Helmet, a Syrian volunteer group. All streets and destroyed buildings are full with dead bodies. It's hell. It's believed tens of thousands of civilians are still trapped in the ever-shrinking rebel enclave. But even though the fighting may be almost over, their suffering goes on.
هدول هون المواد كلهم كانوا مخبينهم هون وهون وهون، كل المواد ما كانوا شوفت خبزه ما يخلونا ناكل، شوفت خبزه، متنا من الجوع، ليالي كثيره تمينا نايمين جوعانين.
Farasha Ahmed uses whatever she can to prepare some food for her family. But she's at a camp for internally displaced people outside Yemen's capital Sana'a. And she won't find much. A bit of rice is all she has to feed her 12 children.
Our houses are on the border with Saudi Arabia. They were hit. They destroyed our homes. We came here to Dharawan and now we have nothing. Our children are ill. We're in the cold. No food, no bedding, no water. We only have God. We're waiting for any organisation to look our way.
Farasha has been in the Dharawan camp for a year now. She shares this barren patch of land with around 450 families. Some try to have some semblance of normal life. This tent even tells passers-by that it's a home. But it does little to hide the desperation. The UN says the war has internally displaced more than 3 million Yemenis. Many have gone to ancestral villages or to live with their families. But in the Middle East's poorest country, many end up in camps.
It's a disaster here in the camp because of the cold, the rain, the infections that are spreading, especially among children. Our health is suffering. There's little food and water. We are ignored by aid organisations. They came 2 or 3 times, but since then we've been ignored.
Around half of Yemen's population are struggling to get food, and famine threatens 2 of Yemen's provinces. Abdu's family has managed to put together a meal. It's just scraps of bread and some dip. It's not quite the nourishing food the children would have hoped for, but with little aid coming into Yemen and a relentless war, it's a luxury they may not find tomorrow.
The US has approved a series of deals to sell a huge amount of arms and military equipment worth more than $7 billion to Saudi Arabia and its allies. The State Department said the deal would allow Washington to provide Saudi Arabia with military and cargo helicopters. The US will also arm the UAE, Qatar and Morocco with helicopters, planes and missiles. The sale, however, still needs to be approved by the Congress. This comes as Riyadh has used US-made cluster bombs and other military equipment against Yemeni people numerous times since the kingdom started a war against its neighbor in March 2015. Meanwhile, Human Rights Watch has slammed the US arms sales to Saudi, saying it could make Washington complicit in the kingdom's atrocities in Yemen.
In a split second, life in Istanbul is shaken to the core yet again. This TV presenter inside the stadium when the first explosion went off outside. The attacks, believed to have been a car bomb and a suicide bomb, struck at the heart of Turkey's biggest city, although the football ground where 2 of the country's top teams had played had already emptied of supporters. The government says the car bomb was close to where police were stationed following the match, and that the attacks were against the security services and citizens. Turkey has suffered a wave of violence over the last 12 months. Of the injured taken to hospital, 17 are having surgery, 6 are in intensive care. No group has yet said it was behind the blasts, but 10 arrests have been made.
A car that was passing by was remotely detonated. 45 seconds later, a man was stopped where policemen were standing, and that person blew himself up. Turkey faced 2 heinous bomb attacks.
A survey conducted for the European Parliament has found that 82% of those living in the EU believe that Daesh terrorists will strike in the bloc again. The Daesh attacks in Paris and Brussels killed more than 160 people, but security experts say that EU countries are still not cooperating sufficiently to counter terrorism. Jerome Hughes reports from Brussels.
Inside the European Council building, Brussels, EU Justice and Home Affairs ministers are given a demonstration on how security forces and medical teams would respond to another terrorist attack in the bloc. Those coordinating the event admit EU countries need to step up cooperation.
The terrorist threat doesn't stop at borders, and as a matter of fact, that is the answer to your question. So yes, we have to learn from each other, and that's the good thing about here. We see the best capabilities of each other, and from that we can learn, and we have to learn to cooperate.
Following the atrocities committed in Paris and Brussels, 82% of people living in the EU believe Daesh will attempt to carry out more attacks in the bloc. That's according to a poll carried out on behalf of the European Parliament. Despite the threat, the bloc's 28 member states are resisting full engagement with one another.
At least 4 people have been killed and another 25 injured after a freight train derailed and exploded in northeastern Bulgaria. The incident took place in the small town of Hitrino. Many victims are being treated in hospital for burns after 2 of the train's tanks, which contain flammable chemicals, blew up after hitting electricity cables. Authorities have ordered an evacuation while 150 firefighters tackle the massive blaze.
German and French leaders have called for extending European sanctions on Russia over the crisis in Ukraine.
Talk about the situation in Ukraine and the Minsk process that proves to be very sluggish. Therefore, it will be necessary to extend the sanctions against Russia once again, though we would like to be further aligned with the implementation of this process.
We must continue to apply the Minsk agreement, and since it has not been followed and the same blockages remain, I, like the Chancellor, am in favor of extending sanctions.
Russian President Vladimir Putin will meet Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe during a two-day visit to Tokyo this week. And they will attempt to settle a territorial dispute that has prevented the countries from signing a formal treaty to end World War II. Putin met with Japanese journalists in Moscow ahead of his trip and said any peace treaty must be based on trust, while Japan's association with the Western sanctions imposed on Russia was also an obstacle. And while Russia is seeking to improve economic relations with Japan, Putin said, "We don't trade in territories."
Every week it's another excuse. We had a massive landslide victory. Hacking is very interesting. They have no idea if it's Russia or China or somebody. It could be somebody sitting in a bed someplace.
Well, Trump's statement refers to a confidential CIA report on Russia's role in the election, which was reported on by the Washington Post. The outlet adds that Moscow's goal was not just to undermine the American electoral system, but, quote, to favour one candidate over the other for political interests. The CIA assessment was shared in a behind-closed-doors intelligence briefing and claimed it had identified individuals linked to the Russian government who gave hacked democratic emails to WikiLeaks, though the intelligence agency has yet to provide any evidence.
Putting 4 decades of US foreign policy into question in a move likely to provoke Beijing, the president-elect hinted that the One China policy, which recognizes Taiwan as part of China, might not continue under his watch, bringing back out the grievances with the country he aired during his campaign.
I don't know why we have to be bound by a One China policy unless we make a deal with China, having to do with other things, including trade. I mean, look, we're being hurt very badly by China with devaluation, with taxing us heavy at the borders when we don't tax them, with building a massive fortress in the middle of the South China Sea.
It comes after Donald Trump angered China earlier this month when he took a call from Taiwan's president. As it stands, the United States is Taiwan's main ally and arms supplier, but no US leader has spoken directly to the country since President Jimmy Carter cut ties with Taipei back in 1979. Trump defended the call, saying he didn't want China dictating to him.
It was a very nice call, short. And why should some other nation be able to say, I can't take a call? I think it actually would have been very disrespectful, to be honest with you, not taking it.
The spokesperson for China's Taiwan Affairs Office has said any interference with or damage to the One China principle would have a serious impact on peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. The remarks come after US President-elect Donald Trump questioned Washington's long-standing position that Taiwan is part of One China. The spokesperson said upholding the One China principle is the political basis of developing China-US relations and the cornerstone of peace and stability in the Strait. He added that if this basis is interfered with or damaged, then healthy, stable development of China-US relations are out of the question.
The temporary emergency unit in a Rio public hospital, now permanently housed in a trailer. A clear sign of the state of Brazil's healthcare system. Patients crammed into the hallway with no money to build new facilities. The underfunded system now faces even further cuts, with the government planning to freeze public spending for the next 20 years. Luana Silva says her grandmother, who suffers from kidney disease, has been sleeping in a chair for a week.
Health system here is rubbish in Brazil, and things will get worse. If we need a hospital, we can't find one.
With the spending cap, I would say we'll be committing a genocide. I hope Congress doesn't approve the austerity measures, because we are already facing a public calamity.
Congress will vote on the controversial austerity bill sometime in December. Some analysts say it is the only way out of the longest recession in decades.
You're going to have some problems because you're going to have a limit to invest in infrastructure or education or healthcare, but there is no money. That's the reality.
President Michel Temer and most of the political elite have been tainted by a massive corruption scandal. Some argue deficit problems could be solved by lowering benefits and pensions for public workers. but these will be left untouched.
I'm not embarrassed to say it. I've actually been waiting quite a long time to tell the world Brazil is not in crisis. Brazil was robbed.
Venezuela is withdrawing its largest banknotes from circulation. The president says it's to prevent counterfeit notes from being smuggled across the Colombian border. The 100 Bolivar note is the most common in Venezuela and is worth 2 US cents on the black market. Annual inflation in the country is estimated at more than 500%. President Maduro has blamed organized crime networks at the Colombian border for buying up Venezuelan notes in order to buy subsidized Venezuelan goods and sell them for large profits in Colombia. Critics, including the main opposition leader, have condemned the move as economically nonsensical. But the president is undeterred. He told a news conference he'd given orders to senior generals. I've told them to close immediately all possible routes of entry into the country by land, air and sea so that these banknotes don't return, he said. The Colombians can take them and keep their scam abroad.
At a farm in eastern France, Stephanie Pelson surveys her chickens. Usually the birds live outside, but with a heightened threat of bird flu across the country, she's forced to keep them indoors. Several cases of the highly contagious H5N8 strain have been found in France. The government is advising farmers to take extra precautions.
In central Chile, where the only sounds are the wind and the birds, geoscientists are looking for signs that could interrupt the area's peaceful atmosphere. And here in Laguna del Maule, they believe they found those signs in a volcanic field that has risen an unprecedented 6.5 feet since 2007.
This volcanic field, Laguna del Maule, is unique in the Andes and maybe in the entire world because there is a very large amount of rhyolite erupted very recently in the last 20,000 years.
Bradley Singer is leading a team of researchers here. They're studying rhyolite, an explosive type of magma with high concentrations of gases, water, and carbon dioxide.
We have rhyolite over here, the Barrancas complex on the skyline.
This abundance of rhyolite has prompted Chile and Argentina to closely monitor the Andes volcanic chain. Any eruption could have the potential to devastate nearby hydroelectric projects. It could also pump out ash that could wipe out crops across Argentina and severely disrupt global air traffic. Patricia Sirogo works for Argentina's Geology and Mining Service.
We are studying all the possible scenarios, rigorously evaluating all of the evidence that we can gather. But it is showing signs of reactivation. It is like a cardiac patient, must be monitored very closely in order to determine the signals.
Signals that could give officials enough time to prepare for the worst-case scenario.